My girlfriend lied about pregnancy after I paid rent, food and tuition for years, so I exposed everything, walked away calmly and won in court. I'm a 27-year-old guy, and for most of my relationship, I truly believed that love meant stepping up financially without keeping score. I thought if I carried enough weight, eventually things would balance out on their own. I met my girlfriend when her life was already on the edge. She was behind on rent, constantly stressed about tuition deadlines, and counting grocery items in the store like each one hurt her. I remember the first night she broke down in my car, hands shaking, whispering, "I don't know how I'm going to make it this month." I didn't hesitate. I told her, "I've got you. We'll figure it out." At the time, it felt like the right thing to say. At first, it was small things. I covered a week of groceries. Then a utility bill she forgot about. Then part of her rent. Every time, she looked at me with watery eyes and said, "This is just temporary. I swear. Once I'm back on my feet, things will be different." I believed her because I wanted to. Because loving someone, to me, meant making sure they didn't fall. Slowly, I became her safety net without even realizing it. Rent turned into a monthly expectation. Groceries became automatic. When tuition deadlines came up, she'd sit next to me on the couch, quiet, anxious, waiting for me to offer. And I always did. I didn't want her to fail. I didn't want to be the reason her future collapsed. She promised me over and over, "Once I graduate, we'll finally be equals. I'll take care of you the way you took care of me." Those words kept me going on nights I stayed up staring at my bank app, wondering why my savings never grew. My friends noticed before I did. They pulled me aside and said things like, "Bro, you're doing way too much," or, "This doesn't feel healthy." I defended her every time. I said they didn't understand her situation. I said this was what commitment looked like. And honestly, I felt proud. Tired, yes, but proud. I told myself that sacrifice was proof I was building something real, even as a quiet voice in my head started asking how much longer I could keep this up. What I didn't notice at first was how quickly gratitude turned into routine. The thank you texts got shorter. The hugs felt automatic. The relief in her voice faded, replaced by something calmer, almost confident, like my help was no longer a gift but a given. At some point, she stopped asking. Bills would come up in conversation casually, like background noise. "Ugh, rent is due again already," she'd say, scrolling on her phone. Or, "I'm so stressed, tuition went up this semester." She wouldn't look at me when she said it. She didn't have to. I'd feel that familiar pressure in my chest, the unspoken expectation hanging between us, and I'd say, "Okay, I'll handle it." Every time. My life started shrinking in ways I didn't fully register. I pushed back, moving out to a better place. I stopped saving seriously. Trips I wanted to take became, maybe next year. When my car needed work, I delayed it because her expenses always felt more urgent. I told myself it was temporary. I told myself love meant patience. Any time I hesitated, even slightly, her tone changed. She'd go quiet. Withdrawn. Hurt. "I just thought you cared," she'd say softly. Or worse, "I don't have anyone else to rely on." That line hit every time. It made me feel cruel for even thinking about limits. Like saying no would make me the villain in her story. Then there were the switches. After a big payment, she'd suddenly be affectionate again. Cooking dinner. Holding my arm in public. Whispering, "I don't know what I'd do without you." It trained me, whether she meant to or not. Support equals closeness. Hesitation equals distance. I started noticing how tired I felt, not just physically, but mentally. Like I was constantly calculating, constantly bracing for the next expense. Still, I kept telling myself this was what building a future looked like. That real relationships weren't always balanced in the beginning. But late at night, lying next to her while she slept peacefully, I'd stare at the ceiling and wonder why it felt like I was the only one carrying the weight. And that quiet thought scared me, because once it showed up, it didn't go away. The night she told me she was pregnant is burned into my memory in a way I can't erase. It wasn't dramatic at first. No big reveal. Just silence. We were sitting in her apartment, the lights low, a half-eaten takeout container on the table. She kept twisting her fingers together, not really listening to what I was saying. Then she whispered, "I need to tell you something." Her voice cracked on the last word. I remember my stomach dropping before she even said it. "I'm pregnant." For a second, everything felt hollow. Like the room lost its sound. I stared at her, waiting for more words, but she just started crying. Full body shaking. I moved closer automatically, holding her while my mind raced through fear, responsibility, and a future I hadn't planned for. She kept saying, "I didn't know how to tell you. I was scared. I haven't told anyone else." That part mattered to me. It made me feel chosen. Trusted. Like I was the one person she could lean on when everything fell apart. I asked questions, quietly, carefully. How far along? What did she want to do? She wiped her face and said she didn't know yet, only that she couldn't handle this alone. She looked straight at me and said, "I need you." Whatever doubts I might have had disappeared in that moment. My fear didn't matter. My confusion didn't matter. I told her, "We'll figure this out together." I promised support without conditions. Financial, emotional, all of it. I told her I wasn't going anywhere. Almost immediately, everything shifted. Our future wasn't abstract anymore. It was heavy. Permanent. Real. Every decision suddenly felt bigger, more expensive, more serious. I started thinking in terms of stability, responsibility, sacrifice. She leaned into me and whispered, "Thank you for not leaving." That sentence locked something inside my chest. That night, after she fell asleep, I sat alone on the couch, staring at the dark TV screen. I felt terrified, but also resolved. I told myself this was what stepping up looked like. That this was the moment men were tested. I had no idea that promise, made out of fear and love, had just tied me tighter than ever before. After that night, everything in our relationship was suddenly filtered through one sentence: "I'm pregnant." It wasn't shouted. It didn't need to be. It hovered over every conversation like a warning. If I looked tired, she'd say, "You shouldn't be stressed right now. Stress isn't good for the baby." If I questioned a purchase, her voice would harden just enough: "Do you really want to argue while I'm pregnant?" And just like that, any disagreement died before it started. I learned to swallow words the same way I swallowed my own anxiety. Expenses multiplied overnight. Prenatal vitamins. Special food cravings that couldn't wait. Ride shares because she was too nauseous to walk. Doctor appointments she said were last minute or private. I'd ask if I could come, and she'd shake her head gently. "It's not necessary. I'll tell you everything after." I told myself that was reasonable. I wanted to be supportive, not controlling. Still, something felt off. There were no ultrasound photos on the fridge. No paperwork lying around. No appointment reminders buzzing her phone when I was nearby. When I asked small questions, innocent ones, she'd tense up. "Why are you interrogating me?" she'd snap, tears appearing instantly. Then guilt would slam into me for even asking. I started measuring my words carefully, like walking on cracked ice. I didn't want to hurt her. I didn't want to be the reason something went wrong. That fear kept me quiet. Meanwhile, my role became crystal clear. Provider. Protector. Problem solver. I worked more hours, sent money without discussion, canceled plans without explanation. My world shrank down to making sure she was okay, or at least appeared to be. Late at night, when she slept curled away from me, I'd scroll through my bank history, watching numbers drop. I'd tell myself it was worth it. That this was temporary. That once the baby came, things would make sense. But there were moments, small, sharp ones, when her stories didn't line up. Dates shifted. Symptoms changed. Details felt rehearsed. Every time my brain tried to connect those dots, my heart shut it down. Because doubting her felt cruel. And yet, the feeling wouldn't leave. The doubts didn't arrive all at once. They crept in quietly, disguised as confusion. Little moments that didn't feel big enough to accuse, but didn't feel small enough to ignore. One night, she mentioned being almost through the first trimester. I nodded, then froze. A week earlier, she'd said she was barely a month along. When I gently asked about it, she brushed it off with a sigh. Pregnancy timelines are confusing. You wouldn't get it. I laughed it off with her, but the math kept replaying in my head long after. Then there were the appointments. She talked about them often, how exhausting they were, how rude the nurses could be, but there was never anything tangible. No printouts. No discharge papers. No follow-up notes. When I asked again if I could come with her, she snapped, "Why are you pushing this so hard?" Tears followed immediately. Do you not trust me? That question shut me down every time. The moment that really cracked something happened by accident. I walked past the bathroom while she was on the phone, door half open. I heard her say, "Yeah, I told him I'm pregnant, it just makes things easier right now." She went quiet when she noticed me standing there. Too quiet. Then she smiled like nothing happened. "Who are you talking to?" I asked. "My cousin," she said instantly. "About school stuff." My chest tightened in a way I couldn't explain. That night, I lay awake next to her, listening to her breathe. I replayed everything, dates, conversations, expenses, reactions. For the first time, I allowed myself to think the unthinkable. What if this wasn't real? The thought made me feel sick. Ashamed. Like a monster. I told myself no one would lie about something like this. No one you loved. No one who cried in your arms and said they needed you. But once the question existed, it didn't leave. Every inconsistency suddenly stood out. Every emotional shutdown felt strategic instead of fragile. I didn't confront her. Not yet. Instead, I made a quiet decision that changed everything. I stopped trusting my feelings, and started paying attention. Once I allowed myself to question things, the picture changed fast. Not emotionally, logically. I didn't confront her. I didn't argue. I didn't accuse. I acted the same as always. Supportive. Calm. Reliable. On the surface, nothing changed. Inside, though, I started noticing everything. Dates. Words. Patterns. I went back through months of messages, scrolling late at night while she slept. I compared what she told me then to what she was saying now. Appointments that never had times. Doctors whose names she couldn't remember. Symptoms that appeared and disappeared depending on the conversation. It wasn't one big red flag, it was dozens of small ones stacking on top of each other. I started documenting things quietly. Screenshots of payments. Transfers for appointments. Tuition receipts. Rent confirmations. I wasn't planning revenge yet. I just needed clarity. Proof that I wasn't losing my mind. The final confirmation came on a weekday afternoon when she said she had a major prenatal checkup. I watched her leave, then waited an hour. On a gut impulse, I drove past the clinic she mentioned before. Her car wasn't there. I waited. 15 minutes. 30. Nothing. When I got home, I sat in my car with the engine off, hands gripping the steering wheel so hard they hurt. My heart wasn't racing. It was eerily calm. Like something inside me had finally snapped into place. That night, I asked softly, "How did the appointment go?" She launched into details instantly. Too fast. Too smooth. I nodded, asked no follow-up questions, and watched her face carefully. She didn't notice. She never did. That was the moment I knew. There was no pregnancy. No baby. No future she promised. I didn't explode. I didn't cry. I felt something colder settle in, clarity. Years of confusion suddenly made sense. The manipulation. The control. The financial dependence wrapped in emotional urgency. I went to bed next to her, staring at the ceiling, realizing the person I'd sacrificed everything for didn't see me as a partner. I was a resource. And once I understood that, I knew one thing for sure: confronting her emotionally would only give her what she wanted. So instead, I stayed silent. And I started planning. The silence after the truth settled in was heavier than any argument we'd ever had. I went through my days like I was underwater, everything muted, distant, unreal. I smiled when she talked. I nodded when she complained. I paid when she asked. But inside, something had broken. Every memory replayed itself with new meaning. Her tears weren't fear, they were leverage. Her affection wasn't love, it was reinforcement. I started seeing our entire relationship as a transaction I never agreed to. At night, when she fell asleep, I'd sit on the edge of the bed and stare at the floor. I felt stupid. Not just hurt, humiliated. I thought about the overtime shifts, the cancelled plans, the things I'd denied myself so she could feel safe. I realized I'd been slowly erasing my own life to maintain hers. The lowest point came when she asked for more money, again. She said she needed it urgently. That something, baby-related, had come up. She said it casually, confidently, like my answer was already decided. I remember standing in the kitchen, phone in my hand, feeling something hollow out inside my chest. I sent the money. The moment the transfer went through, I felt sick. Not because of the money, but because I knew I was feeding a lie. I sat on the floor afterward, back against the cabinet, staring at nothing. That was it. That was rock bottom. Realizing I was fully aware of the deception and still being used. She came in later, kissed my forehead, and said, "I don't know what I'd do without you." I almost laughed. That night, I didn't sleep. I didn't cry. I didn't even feel angry. I felt empty. Like whatever part of me believed in being the good guy had finally died. But in that emptiness, something else formed: control. I understood then that if I confronted her now, she'd cry, deflect, twist the story, maybe even flip it on me. I'd seen how good she was at that. So instead of reacting, I made a decision. I stopped seeing myself as trapped. And I started seeing her as someone who had no idea what was coming. The first thing I learned was that silence is powerful when the other person thinks they're winning. She thought she had me exactly where she wanted me, worried, compliant, dependable. I started by talking to a lawyer. Quietly. I took a half-day off work and sat in a small office that smelled like old paper and coffee, my hands sweating as I explained everything. The payments. The lies. The fake pregnancy. I expected disbelief. Instead, the lawyer leaned back and said, "This happens more than you'd think." He told me to document everything and, most importantly, not to tip her off. No emotional confrontations. No threats. No gotcha moments. Just facts. Evidence. Patience. So that's what I did. I organized months of bank statements, rent transfers, tuition payments, and text messages where she referenced the pregnancy while asking for money. I labeled dates. I highlighted contradictions. Every lie she told me became a line item in a growing folder on my laptop. At home, I stayed the same. I asked how she was feeling. I listened when she complained. I even reassured her when she pretended to panic about the future. She mistook my calm for loyalty. For weakness. The strange part was how peaceful I felt. For the first time in years, I wasn't reacting emotionally. I wasn't trying to save anything. I was preparing to end it cleanly. The lawyer explained that what she'd done crossed legal lines: financial deception, fraud, false claims. Hearing that felt surreal. I'd spent so long questioning myself that having someone say, "No, you were wronged," almost made me dizzy. Every night, I backed up my files twice. I stopped sending money unless it was documented in writing. I asked questions casually through text instead of in person, letting her explain things in her own words. She never suspected a thing. And as the evidence stacked higher, I realized something important. I wasn't just protecting myself anymore. I was setting the stage for the truth to speak louder than anything she could say when the time finally came. I didn't confront her in anger. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't even look upset. That's what shocked her the most. We were sitting across from each other at the kitchen table, the same place where she'd cried about being pregnant months earlier. The room was quiet, afternoon light coming through the blinds. I remember thinking how ordinary everything looked for what was about to happen. I said, "We need to talk." She sighed dramatically. "Can this wait? I'm exhausted." I slid my phone across the table. On the screen were bank transfers. Dates. Messages. Her own words referencing the pregnancy. I watched her eyes move as she scrolled. At first, she smiled like she thought this was about budgeting. Then her face drained of color. "Why are you showing me this?" she asked, voice suddenly small. I told her calmly that I knew there was no pregnancy. That I'd confirmed it. That I'd documented everything. I didn't accuse, I stated. Each sentence landed like a weight she couldn't deflect. She panicked instantly. Denial first. "That's not true." Then anger. "You're spying on me." Then tears. Fast. Desperate. She reached for my hand and said, "I was just scared. I didn't mean for it to go this far." I pulled my hand back. I told her legal action was already in motion. That a lawyer had reviewed everything. That this conversation wasn't a negotiation, it was notice. Her voice cracked. She begged me not to ruin her life. She said I was being heartless. She said I was overreacting. The same tactics that used to work. They didn't touch me. I stood up, grabbed my jacket, and said, "You made your choices. I'm making mine." Later that night, the truth spread faster than I expected. Mutual friends reached out, confused, shocked, angry. Some apologized for not warning me harder. Others asked how long it had been going on. I didn't explain. I didn't argue. I didn't justify myself. I walked away without yelling, without pleading, without looking back. And for the first time since I met her, I felt something close to relief, even though I knew the hardest part was still ahead. The courtroom was smaller than I expected. Quiet. Clinical. Nothing like the dramatic scenes you see in movies. And somehow, that made everything feel more real. I sat at the table next to my lawyer, hands folded, breathing slow. Across the room, she wouldn't look at me. Her leg bounced non-stop, heel tapping against the floor like it was trying to escape on its own. For a moment, I felt a flicker of something, pity, maybe, but it disappeared the second proceedings began. This wasn't about emotion anymore. This was about facts. My lawyer spoke calmly, walking the judge through timelines, payments, text messages, and documented lies. Rent transfers labeled temporary. Tuition payments tied to messages about the pregnancy. Screenshots where she used the baby as justification for urgent money. Each piece landed quietly, methodically. When it was her turn, everything unraveled. Her story changed mid-sentence. Dates didn't match. Details contradicted earlier statements. She blamed stress, fear, mental health. At one point, she said she thought she might have been pregnant. That didn't explain the months of manipulation, the consistent financial requests, or the detailed lies. The judge asked simple questions. Direct ones. She couldn't answer them. I didn't speak much. I didn't need to. Sitting there, saying nothing, felt powerful in a way I never expected. For years, I've been explaining myself, justifying my choices, proving my intentions. Now, the truth stood on its own. When the ruling came down in my favor, it felt unreal. Not celebratory, validating. Like reality had finally caught up with what I'd lived through. She broke down afterward. Crying. Angry. Saying my name like it still held weight. I didn't respond. I gathered my things, nodded to my lawyer, and walked out into the hallway. The air outside the courtroom felt lighter. Cleaner. I stood there for a moment, letting it sink in. I hadn't won by being louder. I hadn't won by being cruel. I won by staying calm, and letting the truth speak where my emotions never could. I thought the court ruling would be the end of it. I was wrong. The fallout didn't explode all at once, it spread quietly, like a stain seeping outward. Friends stopped inviting her out. People who once defended her started asking questions they'd avoided before. The story changed depending on who told it, but the core truth stayed the same: she had lied, and there was proof. I heard things through mutual friends. That she'd lost housing because people didn't trust her anymore. That she'd been cut off financially by relatives who felt manipulated. That she told anyone who'd listen that I'd turned cold and ruined her over a misunderstanding. None of it mattered. The damage was already done. What surprised me most was how often she tried to reach me. Emails. Messages. Missed calls from numbers I didn't recognize. Long paragraphs that started with apologies and ended with blame. I never meant to hurt you. You didn't have to take it that far. After everything I went through, you still abandoned me. I read a few early on, hands shaking, not from anger, but from the realization that she still didn't see me as a person. I was either her provider or her enemy. Nothing in between. So I stopped opening them. Blocking her felt different than I expected. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't satisfying. It was quiet. Final. Like closing a door that had been slamming for years. People asked if I felt bad for her. If I regretted going nuclear. I told them the truth: I regretted staying silent for as long as I did. I regretted teaching someone that my limits didn't matter. The strangest part was the absence of anger. I kept waiting for it to come back, for the rage to flare up again. It didn't. What replaced it was something steadier. Distance. And in that distance, I finally started hearing my own thoughts again, which made me realize how long I'd been living without them. I thought the court ruling would be the end of it. I was wrong. The fallout didn't explode all at once, it spread quietly, like a stain seeping outward. Friends stopped inviting her out. People who once defended her started asking questions they'd avoided before. The story changed depending on who told it, but the core truth stayed the same: she had lied, and there was proof. I heard things through mutual friends. That she'd lost housing because people didn't trust her anymore. That she'd been cut off financially by relatives who felt manipulated. That she told anyone who'd listen that I'd turned cold and ruined her over a misunderstanding. None of it mattered. The damage was already done. What surprised me most was how often she tried to reach me. Emails. Messages. Missed calls from numbers I didn't recognize. Long paragraphs that started with apologies and ended with blame. I never meant to hurt you. You didn't have to take it that far. After everything I went through, you still abandoned me. I read a few early on, hands shaking, not from anger, but from the realization that she still didn't see me as a person. I was either her provider or her enemy. Nothing in between. So I stopped opening them. Blocking her felt different than I expected. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't satisfying. It was quiet. Final. Like closing a door that had been slamming for years. People asked if I felt bad for her. If I regretted going nuclear. I told them the truth, I regretted staying silent for as long as I did. I regretted teaching someone that my limits didn't matter. The strangest part was the absence of anger. I kept waiting for it to come back, for the rage to flare up again. It didn't. What replaced it was something steadier. Distance. And in that distance, I finally started hearing my own thoughts again, which made me realize how long I'd been living without them. Walking away didn't feel like victory at first. It felt empty. Quiet. Like stepping out of a storm and realizing how loud it had been only after the noise stopped. The first thing I noticed was how much space I suddenly had, mentally and financially. My bank account stopped bleeding. My phone stopped buzzing with emergencies that weren't real. I could make plans again without calculating how they'd affect someone else's crisis. For the first time in years, my life belonged to me. I moved slowly. Deliberately. I paid off things I'd neglected. Fixed my car. Rebuilt savings. Small, boring wins, but each one felt like proof that I wasn't broken. That I hadn't been weak. I'd been manipulated, and there's a difference. Some nights, I still replayed moments. The tears. The promises. The way I ignored my instincts because I thought love meant endurance. But instead of anger, I felt clarity. I saw the pattern now. How she confused urgency with intimacy. How I confused sacrifice with worth. The biggest shift wasn't financial, it was internal. I stopped explaining myself. Stopped justifying boundaries. Stopped believing that being the good guy meant being endlessly available. People noticed the change. They said I seemed calmer. Grounded. Like I'd finally exhaled. And they were right. Peace replaced the constant tension I'd mistaken for responsibility. I didn't need revenge beyond the truth. I didn't need her to suffer for me to heal. Walking away calmly, on my terms, was enough. Winning in court mattered, but reclaiming myself mattered more. Now, when I think about love, it doesn't feel heavy anymore. It doesn't feel like a test I have to pass by bleeding quietly. It feels mutual. Balanced. Safe. I lost years, money, and trust, but I gained something I didn't know I'd given away. My voice. My limits. My life. And for the first time, I know this with certainty. Walking away wasn't losing. It was finally choosing myself.